Well, with that said, I want to introduce a really talented modeler who's got one of the great railroads, in my opinion, that I've ever seen. And that's Larry Knapp. Larry's railroad is World War I. And Larry, I can't thank you enough for joining us this evening and sharing your railroad with us.
There you go.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah, there we go. We got you, Larry.
Nice.
Perfect. So what I'm going to do is kind of take you through some pictures of the overall road. Total, I'm not going to call it completed section, call it 85% complete, is about 16 feet long right now by 20 inches deep. I'll walk you through that, and I'll kind of take you through how I go about creating some of the things that I needed to build. Obviously, doing a World War I layout, there is not a lot of kits available. There are some kits available, so I've had to recruit a lot of people and a lot of friends to help me get through this. I couldn't have done it without a lot of folks. So my railroad's called the Corps of Canadian Railroad Troops Europe, 1918. It's British O scale, which is 133.5, but it's pretty close to being ON 30, North American standards. At the height of World War I, there were 16,000 Canadians working narrow gauge railroad lines in Europe, which is obviously a tremendous number of people. They laid about 1,000 miles of track, and at times there were close to 800 locomotives running at any given time. I wouldn't have got very far without a lot of books on the topic. These two books here, the War Department Light Rail Album and the War Department Light Rail Companion, are amazing books. They've got drawings of all the different equipment. You'll see that a little bit later in the presentation. Some of the things I get commented on a lot when people see my actual model, they say there's not enough mud. Trust me, I've done the research. There was not a lot of mud where the railroads were, and there wasn't a lot of mud in the period I modeled, which is late 1918. And then they always say, how come the railroads aren't crossing the trenches? Where's everyone fighting? It's didn't get within a mile of the trench because they didn't want to lose the equipment to enemy shelling, which made perfect sense. Next question is, where do you get everything? And I'm going to explain that as I go through the presentation. And then the funny one is, do all the soldiers have names? I have about 500 painted figures for the layout. So I'll leave that up to your imagination whether I've named them all or not. So here's a sample of one of the 4-foot sections of the layout. It's a bridge module. I'll get into this a little bit more in a second. I've got an artillery module that's 4 feet long that shows a standard artillery position with trackage to deliver the shells. There's what's called a casualty clearing station, where they would pick up soldiers from the side of the tracks that were injured. They'd usually be delivered by trucks or by hand or walk back from the front, sometimes by carts. There was usually also a rest area near the casualty clearing station where they could refresh troops. Now, do these slides too fast, are you good? Here's another picture of kind of a rest area or a cooking station on one of the 4-foot modules. And then this is the last of the 4-foot modules. And I'll get into the structure later, but it's pretty famous. It's in a lot of the different books. It was in the Arras area of France, and the trains back then, they didn't really care to go through a building if they needed to, either break the building down, or else if there was an open gate and they could get through some kind of a farmhouse, they built it through and into the town. So what I do a lot of is I take photographs that I can find, and there's got about 2,000 on my computer right now, plus what's in the books. And there's a great site, which is the Imperial War Museum in the UK. where you can find excellent numbers of pictures. Being a crazy kind of guy, I sit there and actually count the boards on the bridges and how many piers are there and try to do it all together. This bridge was very temporary. Everything was temporary back then, and they built it out of spare railroad ties. So it was an easy way for them to construct a temporary bridge across. I'm not sure whether this is a pond or a shallow river. It would have to be relatively shallow to build something like this. Just another picture of it to kind of show you some of the detail in it, the woodworking, and then a reference photo below. This is this structure that I had scratch build in the Ross area. I had to use gator board to construct it, and then I took brick paper that's available from Foggy Mountain Models, and I cut the brick paper down and then had to insert the stone paper. And I believe it's from, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Notch or Noak from Germany. But I had to intermingle the paper and try to keep it level and straight as best as I could. If you look at the picture up here, you'll see that the roof has collapsed. What happened back then is the roofs were made of tile, and the shell fire wouldn't necessarily destroy the roof, but the concussion from the cannon would knock the tiles off the roof. If you've seen the movie They Shall Not Grow Old, there's actually video of them firing artillery pieces by a farmhouse, and you'll see the shingles sliding off the top of the roof as they fire the artillery pieces. This did take a little bit of time to get the roofing in. Not going to lie to you, and to get all the brickwork done. A good friend of mine, Newell Sage, built up this etched silver locomotive for me. It was flat packed from a company called Worsley Works in the UK. Basically, it had no details to it. It was just flat silver. And we had to go then and get various pieces 3D printed. We had to get the journals 3D printed. This locomotive is called the Dick Kerr. And it was actually built to run as a petrol locomotive or an electric locomotive. So these things at the front, my mouse is a little crazy. On a locomotive would have had extenders up that they could put cantering up to electric lines, but they tried it, and obviously the Germans didn't cooperate very much and would knock down all the electrical lines over the railways. So they ended up just using them as diesel locomotives. A lot of different things have to happen for me to model this stuff. So this is one of the plans from the War Department light rail book. Bob Gilmaster 3D printed this artillery piece that I was able to find on the internet from a World War I modeler. And then this depressed bogey wagon is also a 3D print. And the simplex here is a white metal casting from Right Lines. They had a lot. I wanted to have a lot of scenes where the soldiers were at rest, because obviously they weren't going to be fighting. And I find that if you put figures in action poses, they're not going to hold attention as long as if they're in a pose where you might stand yourself for a minute or two to keep attention. So I try to keep the poses and the themes as static as I can. But there were a lot of these mobile kitchens in the war, and obviously the war ran on feeding the soldiers. So I've got quite a number of those spread out through the layout in different places. Just another sample of the mobile kitchen and kind of what it would have looked like in the war. Also, luckily I've been able to find pictures of things that happened in the war, and then find very similar pieces. This is a white metal kit from Duncan Models in the UK. So it kind of matches what is in the photograph here, although I haven't decided to try to model it in the winter time like they did, although I did put it there for the picture. Next up, this is one of the pictures that actually got me involved or wanting to model Ww1, because I saw the narrow gauge track and I took great interest in the fact that there was a canteen here with a bunch of and so I'm trying to replicate the scene. I haven't quite figured out enough soldiers yet to pack it in, but everyone's trying to get their rum rations here. The sandbags, which I'll show you later, is one of my other exercises in insanity. And they are all scratch built individually and then glued together. These figures are from a company called Ww1 in the UK. They're 3D printed. If you ever get a chance to look at their website, they do make exceptional figures in multiple scales, N, H, O, O, G. Next up, if you can see, this wagon up here is full of soldiers, and I tried to recreate it the best I could by using a bunch of white metal figures. So there's an old adage, you know, measure twice, cut once, which sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But one of the things I didn't quite realize is weigh twice and glue in once. So they're all white metal figures in a white metal cast model wagon. And when I put them all in and glued them all in, this wagon with the figures weighs about 1.25 pounds. So it's extremely heavy for ON30, but I can pull it. So I don't think I could pull 2 of them, but I can pull 1 of them. Just kind of a lot of the locomotives that they used, and this is how it worked. They would use steam locomotives to pull larger trains to within 6 miles of the front. They wouldn't go forward of 6 miles with the steam locomotive because the Germans could see the smoke from the steam locomotive and that would attract unfriendly fire. So they would bring them up and they would cut the trains apart. They take a 9-car train and they cut it up into 3 or 4 segments. And these smaller petrol locomotives would then take over to move the wagons further to the front. And like I said before, they didn't get within 1 mile of the front. When they got to about 1 mile of the front, they typically would either transfer the goods to smaller wagons that were pulled by dogs, horses, or humans, or they would carry them up manpower at night so that they wouldn't expose the equipment moving forward to hostile activity. Again, I take scenes. I'm not sure how we're going to model this. I want to somehow figure out how to model this, but it's a coal plant that was in the background. But you can see that they're moving 2 hospital cars back from the front. And this is my rendition of the hospital cars. Basically, and I'll show you in a second, all the loads for my cars are removable. So I don't have to have as many wagons, and I can have lots of loads. So if I want to change what's going on in the railroad at any given time, I can extract the loads from the wagons and then put in a new load to have a change of scenery. These wagons are actually made, or sorry, these hospital cars are made of brown paper bags and cardboard. I always found this photograph that I found interesting about a car that got hit by shells. I was able to acquire some seconds that were 3D printed. And if you've ever tried to cut a 3D printed model and get it exactly how you want, try it one day. Good luck. I couldn't get it to be exactly like I wanted it to be. But I think I was able to get some form of a good rendition of what a battle damaged wagon would look like.
Unbelievable.
I was talking about different loads. Here's a set of different loads that I have. I've got probably 5 times this number available to drop in the wagons at any given time. One of the main things they transported obviously were artillery shells. I've had over 10,000 artillery shells painted printed 3D for the railroad at this point. You can see how they loaded them into wagons. They typically loaded them above the bogies, what we call trucks here. And obviously they would probably want to put them in so they wouldn't roll around too much. Every one of these shells is an individual 3D print, which then I was insane enough to try to paint artillery markings to describe what the shell was actually used for in the models. I find painting stripes like that with a toothbrush, a toothpick is easiest. Someone suggested I use decals, and I said, huh? I don't think I could decal like that many shells. This just shows you what the 3D print looks like of the shells, kind of when it's rendered, and then when it's sprayed, and then just some examples of kind of piles of shells. And if you look closely at the photographs, you'll see shells everywhere on the layout. Another hybrid car that was between 3D printed and scratch built. I had a friend, Thomas Trollope, who did 3D printing for me. He actually designed these bogies here. They're not available from any manufacturer, so we had to have them built and 3D printed. The War Department standardized things as much as they could. These are what are called Class C bogie wagons, and they were used under multiple types of wagons, or they could be used individually, which I'll show you again in a second. But the 3D printed parts on this are all of the kind of the castings here that have the rivets in them, and then everything is kind of scratch built with wood behind it. Another exercise in craziness was trying to do duck boards. I wasn't about to try to fill an entire wagon with a couple hundred duck boards that were individually glued together. So another friend designed and 3D printed the duck boards for me. But again, you can see a sample of how they were delivering the duck boards to the front. So if you're not familiar with what a duck board is, they used to use them on top of the mud in the trenches themselves, or in areas that had a lot of shell craters, so they could keep the soldiers above the mud and they wouldn't get stuck. If the soldiers fell off the duck boards, they were probably going to drown in the mud in some places. So there were a lot of pictures and a lot of these things supplied to the front. Another interesting fact is, and I haven't modeled this yet, but they had whole logging divisions that they brought to France to cut down the forest there. And they would have portable log mills that looked very similar to what we would use in narrow gauge logging camps. And they were built by the Canadians primarily, so they look very much like they would have looked like in North America. So at some point in time, I want to build some form of a law mill and have a kind of section of the layout that'll have that, where they're cutting wood and building these things and delivering them to the front. Here's another example of them stacking duck boards. Here's the plans for them that we used. And then these A-frames, I've got a whole bunch of those in a load somewhere, and they were used to support the trenches. So they were built in the hundreds of thousands as well. Just another sample of kind of stuff moving to the front haphazardly. I got some better pictures where they've got church pews, things like that thrown on top. Haven't got that far to model that type of thing yet, but at some point I hope to. Talked about the Class C bogies that Thomas printed. You can't really see this picture, but they did actually lift the artillery up on ramps and then slid the bogies underneath the artillery, and then they greased these pieces of wood and dropped the artillery pieces on the wood, so the wood would pivot on these things as they moved them up to the front. This is a sample of a stores or a tool van. I want to build the entire train. It's a 7-car train. They had 5 of them in the war, but it was basically a mobile shop that they could deliver to various places close to the front, or if they were going to be building a new kind of a new yard or something like that, or needed to do repairs. But they had generator cars and shop cars and kind of design cars, all kinds of different things in them. So it's very interesting stuff to model, but this is as far as I. All right, so the white metal kits that I'm showing you in most of these pictures are a little bit of an exercise in insanity. So you'll see here, this is the plan for the kit and how many pieces are in each truck or bogie. I think it's almost 30 pieces, and you have to drill about 15 holes in these things with a hand vise to get them together. So when we talk about bricks and stuff like that, I understand the pain of actually trying to put these together. And I don't put full brake systems under all of them because it would just be too much effort, and you can't really see them once they're done. One of the other things I wanted to have a realistic look for the couplers. So I had to get Lambert Locomotive Works to try to build something for me. So this was one of the starts with glued magnets to some of the existing white metal couplers I had. Dylan then went a step further, and if you see the drawing up here, and I should have had a picture of this, I unfortunately don't, he actually measured the magnets for me and then built this coupler that I could glue the magnets into. And so the cars will automatically couple. Obviously, they won't automatically uncouple. I have to pull them apart. But he also did build this kind of pin for me as well if I want to do it manually. Just a sample of another picture I found, and then building a signalman station out of the sandbags. You'll see here I talked about within a mile of the they had hand wagons. I do have some hand wagons that will roll. Haven't figured out how to make any people that will actually walk behind them and push them at this point in time. Maybe one day so the modeling will get much better in this world, or my skills will get there, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Another sample of just vehicles that I would need to have for the layout. Holt tractors were used extensively to move artillery to the front. And then another friend, Philip Smith, created these rum jugs for me so that I could kind of represent this scene. He's got some neat castings available. Then another friend, Newell Sage, was bored and asked me what he might be able to do for me. I said, well, I need some screw pickets. So screw pickets, at first when they were trying to lay the barbed wire, they would hammer pegs into the ground, and obviously the enemy would hear you and start shooting at where they heard the noise. So these screw pickets, they started to make them so you could sneak off at night and you could put them in the ground and screw them in silently. I think Newell probably made 1,000 of these things for me. There's going to be a higher load of them, but you can see up here pickets without barbed wire at this point, and then a whole bunch of pickets here. And they're kind of scattered through the scenery as well. Again, taking reference photos. I haven't finished this structure yet, but I'm going to have a farm on here on the layout somewhere, and trying to replicate this scene with the artillery piece. Again, I'll have a tank somewhere on the layout. One of the big things in the war when it got into the 1918s was capture the German equipment and create trophy pieces. So you might have seen it in one of the earlier pieces, or pictures I went through kind of fast, but I've created all these captured German artillery pieces from wargaming castings. The castings weren't very good, so it did take some time to restructure some of them and build new scratch build pieces for them. But I think they turned out pretty decent. You can get pieces from different places. This Lance tractor came from a manufacturer in, I think, Italy. But what they did in the war was they captured the equipment and they would use it till it broke down because they didn't have enough stuff. So they would use it until it broke down, obviously, and then they would just discard it. So I'm going to have captured stuff on the layout at different points. Bob Geldermacher, who I think was on the show a couple of weeks ago, 3D printed these trucks for me, or lorries, and so that I can have them at various points on the railroad with different loads on them. And I was talking about sandbags, and I think I probably got about 4,000 to 5,000 sandbags on the layout, but I use this stuff called DOS clay. You can buy it at Hobby Lobby or any of the kind of hobby shops. And I was stuck at the beach one day, it was raining. So I devised a scheme to go out to Hobby Lobby in the morning, get this DOS clay and start building sandbags. And it was pretty simple process, just drew from lines, drew how long I needed the sandbag to be, grabbed the knife out of the kitchen drawer, didn't see me, got some water in the clay and rolled it basically into snakes, flattened it out and chopped them all up and then created sandbags. You can see you could also use the DOS clay to make other things like duffel bags or flour bags. So it's really handy material and goes a long way. $10 for the DOS clay, and I had a 40% off coupon, and I think I probably still have a third of the bag left. But you can see this whole module is basically almost 4 feet long, and it's completely covered with some flavor of sandbag. Wanted to have a grave scene, so I made that, but this was part of a challenge that they had last year to build a scene on a business card. So the whole scene basically fits on one of my business cards. And it's going to throw a few more pictures up here for you of various scenes. Here's a part of one of my small armies that I've glued in place. And that's basically it for me. Any questions?
Larry, why World War I? What drew you to model that era?
I found the pictures. Well, it all started actually a long time ago. Boulder Valley Models made what was called a tin turtle, and he had a picture, and I started to get interested in it, and then I started doing the research on it, and it was, in my estimations, probably one of the largest narrow gauge railroads that was ever built. When you consider that, the British had around 1,000 miles of track, the French probably had the same amount, and the Germans probably had at least that amount on the other side, all the same gauge. And as the war shifted, they would use each other's equipment and reuse each other's track. And so it just seemed like very fascinating that there would be that much stuff and that much equipment. And plus my great-great-grandfather was over there and kind of was part of the supply system.
What is your next major focus for your model railroad?
I had just ordered a 3D printer. It's a new model. It's still being produced right now, so I'll probably get it next month. I need some friends to help me learn how to do 3D printing, but I was able to purchase some what are called STL files that you use to create 3D prints. And these STL files you can take them and they can be almost any scale, but you can rescale them to the size you need. So I purchased basically an entire destroyed town worth of STL files. And so I'm going to start printing those, but the buildings are going to be pretty big. Like there's a destroyed chapel I want to build, or church. It's probably going to be about 18 inches long and about 16 inches high and 8 inches deep. And the railroad will kind of pass by it somehow. So it'll be an interesting exercise, something new I haven't done before. Then the rest of the town will be destroyed. I also want to build a field hospital. Because the railroads ran right into the field hospitals to take the wounded in. They would actually order to take them right off the trains and try to get them fixed, the soldiers fixed up. That's going to involve creating some new things. I've been trying to figure out how to make the tents that they used in them and make them look realistic. I'm getting close, but I'm not happy yet so far. That's kind of my next two big projects.
Well, I'm very impressed with your model railroad. I've seen photos of it before and heard people talk about it, but seeing it in the detail that you've shown tonight, it's really impressive to me. Anybody have any other questions for Larry?
Yes, Larry, I'm so glad that you showed the couplers and how you and Dylan worked together to make those. Were those couplers standard throughout most of the allies that were fighting over there, or did each country's army kind of have their own? How'd that work?
Those were standard in the British Army. The German ones look slightly different, but they worked in a similar fashion as did the French and American ones. They're all obviously there were no knuckle couplers at the time, so everything was some form of a link and pin with chains. But they were able to link the different wagons together. Like I said before, they used captured equipment. I've got photographs of German wagons set up with French wagons and British wagons and American wagons kind of on different trains. So they all were able to interconnect with each other.
Thank you.
Larry, have you ever been to the webpage Landships 2?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Have you ever been to the webpage Landships 2?
Yes.
Okay, you know about the paper models and downloads then? You know about the paper models and downloads that are there?
I have not seen those, no.
Explore that site a little bit more and you'll find models for paper models, and you'll find your tanks in there. You'll find a lot of tanks, armored cars, and a number of other things that are paper models. And you may just want to copy the paper stuff and cut it out and use it for debris if you don't like the idea of using paper. Now for your tents, coffee filters make good tent material.
Oh, that's a good idea. I haven't tried that yet.
And
I've tried
if you're doing it in HO, tea bags make good tent material.
Okay. I'll have to use coffee filters because the tea bags are going to be too small.
Yeah. Okay, that's
Unless
all.
I start sewing them together.
Yeah,
Hey,
I was very interested in World War I myself, and that's. Do you by chance have a web page or a Facebook page that shows your models?
I have on the old Railroad Lines forum. I've got a thread established there. It's about 70 pages long.
Okay, I'll have to look it up. Thank you, sir.
Hey, Larry. Hey, Larry, how do you, you said you got some 500 soldiers, and I know you're doing a lot of 3D printing. You're going to do it yourself as well in the future, but how did you get all those different poses? Because there's a lot, right? A lot of different poses.
Yeah, that's where you have to have friends in the hobby. When I started this a few years ago, a bunch of people jumped in when they saw my first post and said, "Oh, I might be able to help you." So a lot of the things I have are white metal castings. They come out of a company called PLM Castaways in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a website. So a friend of mine in the UK who saw what I was doing, I call him a friend because now he's definitely a very close friend, was at a train show, and this company was there, and he started taking pictures for me and sending them back. Well, he said, I don't live very far from this manufacturer's house, so he was constantly driving over there and buying me figures and shipping them over to me in the US so that I could do something with them. So some of the figures are converted from other figures. So I've like chopped the top of the heads off and glued Brody helmets on them, or added suspenders to them, or changed them in one way, shape, or form. Was also able to acquire about 50 figures in 3D STL files. And Bob again was very helpful with me, and we took the figures, and because soldiers are typically, if they're kind of on parade or something like that in a standard pose, you can take these 3D files and you can resize them. You can make them fatter, skinnier, taller. You can mirror them. So Bob took like single figures and made, 30 different figures out of them by making them mirrored or a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. And so if you pose them looking from the back, they all would have had standard equipment, but they're all different heights and maybe a little bit different girths. So they look like they're different figures. So I think he probably printed upwards of 300 figures for me.
Nice.
And again, the poses are mirrored and things like that.
Yeah, that came out really well. I would say worked perfectly. Nicely done.
Larry, one of the things that impresses me so much is the creativity that you brought to this. I mean, I know that you've done a lot of research on it, but the way that you present the models, the way that you talk about it, I mean, to me, it's as if you were actually there, and this is what you're building is what you actually saw.
Well, thank you. Not going to claim to be that old, but we're time traveler.
Any other questions for Larry? Larry, thank you so very much. I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing your Run Railroad with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you.